On April 27, 2020, Hertz decided not to pay its rent. Not on an office, on cars, roughly 500,000 of them, parked in storage lots across the United States, going nowhere. 25 days later, Hertz was in bankruptcy court. Now, the obvious explanation is sitting right there. Nobody flew, nobody rented, the money stopped. All true, but here is the part that explanation does not cover. In that same quarter, Hertz's revenue fell 67%. The cost of its cars fell 4%, because Hertz's monthly bill for its own fleet was never tied to how many cars it rented out. It was tied to what those cars were worth. And in April 2020, that was the worst possible thing to be tied to. So this is not a video about a pandemic. It's about a contract. Hertz's American fleet was financed through a subsidiary that leased the cars back to Hertz under an agreement where the monthly rent floated against the resale value of those same cars. That clause turned a survivable collapse in demand into an insolvency with a fuse on it. 25 days, from a missed payment to Chapter 11. Here is exactly how that machine was built, and then how fast it went off. Start with a question that sounds stupid, and isn't. Who owned Hertz's cars? Not Hertz. At least, not the part of Hertz you would recognize. The United States fleet sat inside a financing subsidiary called Hertz Vehicle Financing II HVF II. It issued asset-backed notes to investors, used the money to buy the cars, and then leased those cars back to the Hertz you rent from, under something with a very long name, the amended and restated Master Motor Vehicle Operating Lease and Servicing Agreement. Strip the legal English out of it and you get one sentence. Hertz rented its own fleet from itself and sent the rent to bondholders. Now the clause. This is the single most important sentence in the story, and it is Hertz's own, from the quarterly report it filed in 2020. Quote, monthly payments under the operating lease are variable and significant and are subject to volatility depending upon the changes in current market value estimates of the underlying leased vehicles. Read that again with the jargon knocked off. The rent was not set by how much Hertz earned from the cars. It was set by what a used car buyer would pay for them. Every single month, the used car market repriced Hertz's largest expense, and Hertz did not get a vote. And for years, that was a feature, not a flaw. Tying the rent to the value of the collateral is what made the debt cheap. Bondholders were lending against metal they could repossess and sell, so they charged less for it, and cheap fleet debt is how a rental company affords 500,000 cars in the first place. At the end of 2019, Hertz carried $13.4 billion of vehicle debt against $3.7 billion of everything else. The fleet financing wasn't a side arrangement, it was the company. The clause only bites in one specific scenario: used car values falling hard at the exact moment rental demand disappears. So hold the shape of this in your head. Hertz controlled, in every way a customer would recognize, roughly 500,000 cars, and every month it paid rent on them to itself except the number was set by a market Hertz did not control, could not hedge, and in the spring of 2020 could not sell into. $13.4 billion of debt sat on the other side of that arrangement. Now watch what happens when the travel industry switches off in 9 days. March 2020. Airports empty out in about a week and a half. Hertz's revenue is overwhelmingly airport revenue, which means it doesn't decline. It stops. Cars come back to the lots and stay there. And the same event that ended the demand also closed the exit. Auctions shut, dealerships shut, and used car values fell sharply that April. So Hertz is now holding a fleet it cannot rent, cannot sell, and cannot stop paying for. 2 of those 3 are a bad quarter. The third one ends the company, and it shows up on a single page of the next quarterly filing. Here is that page. Second quarter, 2019. Total revenues, $2,511 million. Second quarter, 2020, $832 million, a 66.9% collapse. 2/3 of the business, gone in a quarter. Now, the line underneath it, depreciation of revenue-earning vehicles and lease charges. That's the cost of the fleet. Second quarter 2019, $634 million. Second quarter 2020, $610 million, down 3.8%. And vehicle interest expense went the other way, up from $127 million to $132 million. Revenue fell by 2/3. The fleet cost what the fleet cost. Which brings us to a Monday. On April 27, 2020, Hertz did not make certain payments due under the operating lease, including the full rent payments. Not a default on a bank loan, not a missed bond coupon. A missed rent payment from Hertz to a subsidiary of Hertz on cars Hertz had been driving for years. On paper, it reads like an internal accounting problem. 4 days later, it wasn't. April 27th. The rent isn't paid. May 1st, 4 days later, that missed payment causes what the documents call an amortization event. May 4th. Hertz signs forbearance agreements and limited waivers with its lenders, including holders of roughly 60% of the principal amount of the Series 2013, notes, 60%, which means 40% did not sign and the time Hertz bought ran only to May 22nd. May 5th, Hertz files an 8K disclosing that an amortization event is now in effect for every series of HVF II notes, and a liquidation event is in effect on the variable funding notes, one skipped payment, on one lease, every series of the fleet's financing, in runoff, in 8 days. So, what does an amortization event actually do? Under it, the proceeds from selling the vehicles must be primarily applied to paying principal and interest on those notes, and, in the filing's own words, will not be available to finance new vehicle acquisitions for Hertz. Read that as a business, not as a document. Hertz could still sell its cars. It just couldn't keep the money. The fleet stopped being an asset the company operated and became collateral in runoff, being liquidated on the bondholder's schedule into the worst used car market in a decade, and the forbearance clock was still running. Here's the test that isolates the mechanism. Avis budget, same quarter, same closed airports, same vanished demand, same used car market, same asset-heavy model and fleet debt, of its own, that was also asset-backed. Avis budget never filed for bankruptcy. The pandemic was not gentler to it. The difference was that Hertz had been a leveraged company since its 2005 buyout, and that when Hertz's lease payment came due in April, it wasn't made, and only about 60% of the relevant note holders agreed to hold off while it was sorted out. Avis kept paying and stayed out of court. Same storm, different contract, one filing. Bankruptcy is usually the moment a company stops being forced to do things. For Hertz, it worked the other way around. 6 weeks after filing, a federal judge told Hertz exactly how many of its own cars it had to sell, and by what date. The number was not round. It was 182,521. First, the filing itself. The forbearance expired on May 22, 2020. That same day, Hertz Global Holdings and its subsidiaries filed Chapter 11 petitions in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the District of Delaware. Case number 20-11218, 25 days, from a missed rent payment on cars it already had, to a company with more than 500,000 vehicles in Chapter 11. At its peak that year, Hertz's rental fleet was 515,700 vehicles in the United States and another 131,500 internationally. Then, on July 24th, the court entered what's called the interim lease order, the deal between Hertz and its own fleet lenders, approved by a judge. 2 numbers in it matter. First, Hertz had to dispose of at least 182,521 lease vehicles between June 1st and December 31st, 2020. Roughly a third of the American fleet sold into the same collapsed used car market that had just detonated the lease. Second, $650 million of base rent, in 6 equal monthly payments of about $108 million, July through December. Still paying rent. On cars it was being ordered to sell. Hertz ended up disposing of about 198,000. There's one more piece, and it's the strangest thing an American company did in 2020. In June, with the company already in Chapter 11, Hertz's stock started climbing. Retail traders were buying a bankrupt equity, So Hertz asked the court for permission to sell them more of it, an at-the-market program of up to $500 million in new shares. And in its filings, Hertz told those buyers exactly what they were buying. Quote, "There is a significant risk that the holders of our common stock will receive no recovery and that our common stock will be worthless." It sold about $28 million worth, net, before suspending the program on June 15th and terminating it on June 18th. And then the ending nobody predicts from the middle of this story. Hertz emerged from Chapter 11 on June 30th, 2021, and the shareholders, the ones warned in writing that they might get nothing, were not wiped out. Not made whole, the recovery came in far below the pre-collapse price, but not zero. Because the used car market that collapsed in April 2020 spiked to record highs in 2021, the same asset that broke the lease on the way down made the estate solvent on the way up. Which tells you something exact about what happened here. The cars were never the problem. The contract written on top of them was, "Go back to the lot. 500,000 cars in rows, April 2020, doing nothing. Every one of them already bought, already driven, already earning nothing. And every month an invoice arrived, priced off what a stranger at an auction would pay for them. An invoice that did not care that the airports were closed. That is what this case file establishes. An asset-heavy business can be solvent on Monday and in default by Friday, when its single largest cost floats against the resale value of its own assets. Hertz didn't lose its cars. It lost control of what they cost. If you got something out of this one, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe. There's a new case file coming. Next investigation. Another company where the number that killed it was buried in a contract nobody ever read out loud.